You're watching a replay of Brain Drain with Rich Cabaceres. For more videos just like this, hit that red subscribe button.
And good morning. You're listening to Brain Drain on the legendary 1480 WSAR. I am Rich Cabaceres, and you can call in and join this conversation when we get to the topics. 508-673-1480. How about that? You can watch us live on WSAR.com, Spindle City Auto Glass Studio Cam. You can watch us live on Facebook Live. To those viewing right now on Facebook Live, share this so your friends can see all the rave about this show, Brain Drain. You can also comment below. Also, you can listen to us anywhere in the world on your cell phone by downloading the TuneIn Radio app and typing in WSAR. My sound will come to you live in your ears, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Thursday. And if you're listening on the AM airwaves, all the way to Cape Cod, all the way down into Rhode Island and anywhere else in the South Coast, guess what? Today is Thursday, meaning that after today, you can't hear my voice until Monday. That's good because the weekend's coming up. You have Friday left, but at that point it will be thank God it's Friday. Except for the fact that you're going to miss my voice. So I will see you all on Monday again after today's show. But we have 2 hours today to talk about something that really impacts a lot of people. A lot of people in Massachusetts, a lot of people in the South Coast, a lot of people in the country of the United States. Why? Because we're talking about minimum wage. And the idea of a minimum wage increase isn't something novel, but it's something that's happening again throughout the entire United States. Various states are looking at increasing the minimum wage. Seattle, a city in Washington, increased the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Various states are talking about increasing their wage to $15 an hour. And the federal minimum wage is being kicked around about going up. So the question is who does this help? Who does this hurt? And, you know, I kind of did a little bit of research and a little bit of background on this. And if a lot of you know that I kind of had a little bit of a background in finance before I came on the air here. So it's something that I can kind of relate to a little bit. And I can relate to it even more because I remember the days of being 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, earning a minimum wage, and growing up on welfare, living on my own at 17, 18 years old, and having to survive on a minimum wage when it was $6 an hour and $6.75 an hour. And I'm sure a lot of you out there can tell me about minimum wages that were a lot less that you lived on. Now the question is should this be something that people have to live on, or should it be something that kind of helps people get ahead? There are some states that have a child age. There's an adult wage for full-time workers, and then there's a child wage where kids who are working part-time and going to school, they can earn less of a wage than the actual minimum wage. Is that the type of thing that we should take a look at? But let's look at some of the pros and cons of increasing a minimum wage. So one of the pros is people make more money. A lot of people make a lot more money, right? But the con is the cost of living increases. And there's no better indication of that than look at the minimum wage and look at the price of the Big Mac or the Whopper. They go up almost together because places like Burger King, McDonald's, places that are fast food joints, places that are restaurants have to increase the cost of the goods sold to you. Grocery stores have to increase the cost of the goods sold to you to pay the wages of their employees. Another pro? People move above the poverty threshold, right? So people who get minimum wage increases, a lot of the people who are slightly above the minimum wage, their employer doesn't want to look like they don't want to support their employees, so they keep them slightly above the minimum wage, which pushes people above the poverty threshold, which that's good for a lot of people, but the poverty threshold nationally is a lot different than the poverty threshold in the individual states. And you can take states like New York, California, Massachusetts, anywhere in New England. You could take certain sections of certain states, and you can point to if they were living on minimum wage and they were above the poverty threshold, well, the cost of living in those areas are a lot higher than that minimum wage. So the question becomes, does this really help people or hurt people? One of the cons to people being above the poverty threshold and increasing the minimum wage is people will lose jobs because employers, especially small businesses, will not be able to afford some of their minimum wage workers getting 20% increase, a 10-15% increase because of minimum wage policy. So again, a conversation where we have to weigh out the pros and the cons. And lastly, one of the pros, it closes the wage gap. The argument is that when people get the minimum wage, the people who are the wealthiest suffer an immediate impact. They make 4%, 3% less revenue. But the argument is, and the con, is that it's only temporary. What happens is the cost of living goes up around everybody else, and then if the minimum wage is 12 or 15 or whatever the number is, you know what happens? The cost of milk goes up, the cost of bread goes up, the cost of the Big Mac, the Whopper go up. And ultimately, the people who just got the minimum wage increase, while they'll be able to experience some short-term relief, long-term, they're going to be just as poor as they were the day before, and that's the con argument. So let's not only talk about, does minimum wage hurt you, does it help you, but let's talk about the impact that it has on you in your daily life. If you're working for minimum wage, call in 508-673-1480. If you're working for minimum wage, comment below. If you're working for minimum wage, or you know somebody who's working for minimum wage and this is going to help you, call in. If you're working for middle class wages or working poor wages and you think that the minimum wage is going to make you poorer when it increases, call in, because that is a lot of you, right? A lot of you are slightly above the minimum wage rate. And maybe you're $3 an hour, $4 an hour above minimum wage. When minimum wage increases, are you going to be able to maintain the same percentage above minimum wage? Probably not, right? So if you're $4 above minimum wage at, say, $11 an hour, and then if some of these states that are looking for $15 an hour, they increase it by $4 to $15 an hour, your wage goes up to $19 an hour. Well, guess what? Percentage-wise, you're poorer when the cost of living goes up than you were because the gap between you and the minimum wage has shrunk. So, really, is minimum wage just increasing the wage gap? Up again, we are talking about the minimum wage, how that impacts you. We're talking about the pros and cons of minimum wages increases. And does this help you? And I can speak firsthand, right? I was living on minimum wage on my own for an extended period of time. Back when minimum wage was $6 an hour and $6.75 an hour, and you know what happened? Every single time the minimum wage went up, the cost of things went up. So I know a lot of you are experiencing that. But also, if you're making, say you're making $18, $19 an hour right now, and your state wants to increase minimum wage to $15 an hour, do you think that your wage is going to increase at the same percentage as the minimum wage? Probably not. They're probably going to just give you the dollar increase, which actually makes you poorer than you were yesterday, right? So if minimum wage goes from $11 to $15 an hour, that is a $4 increase, then, and your wage goes from $15 an hour to $19 an hour, the percentage of an increase from 11 to 15 is a lot greater than that from 15 to 19. Think about that for a second. So if you're close to minimum wage, which $15 an hour right now doesn't sound like it's close, but it is, and your wage goes up by $4 comparatively, you just became poorer because of minimum wage policy. And granted, you're above the poverty line, but does that help you? Because when cost of living goes up, you're going to be closer to the poverty line than you were before. And think about it even at a greater scale, right? If you're making $23 an hour, $24 an hour, $28 an hour, do you think you're going to get a pay increase of the same percentage? I'm pretty sure that you're not going to. And you can take a look at the wage gap as evidence that that doesn't happen. So why do we continue to push for minimum wage? Or do you think that a minimum wage increase is necessary? If we don't, people will start to become poorer and poorer and poorer. Or do we need to look at something else, like tax policy? Do we need to start looking at things like, why is it that the Democratic Party pushes for minimum wage increases and tax cuts for the ultra poor, and the Republican Party focuses on making sure minimum wage increases don't happen and tax cuts for the ultra rich? And what about the middle class? So I think let's dive into that a little bit more, right? Let's dive into what happens there. We just had tax reform, right? Donald Trump just proposed tax reform. And the biggest winner in these tax reform changes were corporations, which gives you a job. And I'll give him some applause for that.
Take that with your beard.
So there's Cedric Maxwell saying, congratulations. He's excited about corporations getting a large tax cut. And majority of Americans got a tax cut. And you could say percentage-wise, the majority of the Americans who got the largest percent tax increases were middle wage earning people. But why do people who make greater than $349,000 a year have to get a 2% tax cut? Right? I guess you could say it's fairness, but when you take that 2% and you put it into actual dollars, the amount of money that people who are millionaires or making $1 million a year are going to save far blows the people who are earning middle incomes away, right? If they earn $100,000 above, above above the highest rate, which is 37%, you know what that looks like to them? They just saved $2,000. How much money do you have to save in taxes before you save $2,000? So if you're making, say, $60,000 a year, you know how much money you just saved in your taxes? $2,000, right? So what happens if they earn $200,000 above $349,000 a year? They just save $4,000. If you're a middle working person, it's going to take you a lot longer to save that $4,000. So really, this is also benefiting the ultra rich. And we've seen that trickle-down economics does not work. If you think trickle-down economics works, call in 508-673-1480. But if you don't, then call in, because I want to hear what you think. So we're talking about the minimum wage, we're talking about tax reform, and we're talking about, is there a better way to do this than just do minimum wage increases and allowing taxes to kind of run rampant and be something that is very hard to wrap your head around. Now, let's go to some Facebook comments. Somebody says, there is no middle class. That's a fair point. Is there a middle class? There is no middle class. There's only the working class, poor, and the wealthy elite. Somebody else says, if wages haven't gone up, then why hasn't the cost of products gone down? And somebody else says, I was making $3.15 an hour at McDonald's back in 1985. Wow. How about that? So yeah, I thought 6 was cheap, but yeah, it's funny how inflation works. Somebody else says, the cost of a product has continued to go up without an increase in wages. I think that's fair. Let's dive right into the calls. Call, you're live in 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
How you doing?
Good, you?
Not bad.
Hartford University did a study on minimum wage, and they claim for every 1% that the wages goes up, 4 to 5% of small restaurants go out of business.
How about that? And
so, minimum wage is just a scam.
Well, I don't think it's a scam, but when you're operating in a business that has slim margins, what happens if you have to increase your employees' wages? If you're getting 4% margins, 5% margins in grocery stores and in supermarkets, what happens? And
according to their study, the small restaurants tend to disappear. So, if they're claiming that they're doing this for small businesses, not according to that study.
I think you make a very fair point. And, if people feel opposite of you, I hope that they call in 508-673-1480. Talk about some studies that say the exact opposite. But thank you so much for your call. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Today, going to go back to the lines. You are live on 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Rich.
How you doing?
Not too bad. Couple things regarding this minimum wage, especially seeing that we're in a border community here with the state of Rhode Island. The state of Rhode Island right now, their minimum wage is $10.10 an hour, and of course we know in Massachusetts it's $11 an hour. So I'm curious if, these border communities and on the Rhode Island side have more difficulty trying to get employees for minimum wage jobs when someone can just jump over the border and they get a 90-cent an hour increase. I mean, let's say you've got someone that lives in Tiverton, high school student or anyone. I mean, the minimum wage in Rhode Island's $10.10. They could jump right over the border and they go up to $11 an hour. Same thing, East Providence, Rhode Island versus Seekonk, or Barrington, Rhode Island into Seekonk. So I'm wondering if the employers on the Rhode Island side that have minimum wage jobs in border communities are forced to increase their minimum wage up to 11 to be competitive, or if they have more difficulty trying to get employees for minimum wage jobs.
Well, if you live in one of these communities that has a larger wage surrounding your community, I'd love for people to call in. So 508-673-1480 if you want to join that conversation, because I know there's a lot of business owners who live in various states who are listening to this show right now who I definitely have something to say about exactly that. So that's a very, very good point.
Rhode Island is scheduled to go up to 1050 on January 1st, 2019, so the difference will be less. But just doing the simple math, the 1010 Rhode Island minimum wage versus the 11 in Mass, if you're full-time, it's a $36 a week difference, and for 40 hours, for 52 weeks, it's close to $1,900 a year difference. So I always wondered with these border communities if that was an issue or not,
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and it's a question that we should be asking. So thank you so much for your question.
Okay, bye.
Have a great day. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Good morning, Rich. How are you?
Not bad. How are you doing?
I am well today.
That's great.
I just wanted to point out it's a little sad that we live in the state of Massachusetts, and there's a lot of good programs available. How do I put it? This is as good as it gets, if you think about it, in terms of where we live in the country. So for people who are making minimum wage, they have access to things like we have universal health care at the state level, more or less. There's just a ton of benefits for people who are making minimum wage and working poor. And I'm sure if some people who are working poor calls in, like myself, will tell you that it still sucks. So it must be really terrible to be making minimum wage in, let's say, a state outside the Northeast corridor. I think there's states where the minimum wage is still like $8 or something, and the cost of living is lower, but then they have things like there's no health insurance, there's no, there's tons of other programs that we have in this state that aren't available in other states. The point I'm trying to make is that if it's bad here making minimum wage, and we have some of the best social programs in the country as a state, it might really be time to raise the minimum wage, not only here, but in other places as well.
And one thing that the people in some of those states that make low minimum wage, they'll say, is the majority of people who are making minimum wage are people who aren't working full-time. And those full-time workers are making above minimum wage and have access to benefits and things like that. And I think you bring up a good point, because maybe there's a happy medium somewhere in the middle. And I actually hinted towards that in the beginning, where there was a wage for kids who are teenagers who are working part-time, and then there's a wage for people who are working full-time, and two different minimum wages.
Yeah, I agree. And, something I've always thought of is, the problem with the minimum wage is that it really is harsh on small businesses compared to larger corporations and companies that, in response to minimum wage, either just eat the cost, or they don't usually, Walmart, for example, isn't the kind of company that I would see actually passing the cost on to consumers. The only thing I can see them doing is similar to what McDonald's does. McDonald's in Fall River, in fact, does is replacing people with kiosks.
Well,
and I don't know if that's in response to the, it looks like the minimum wage is going to be on the ballot for $15 an hour in the state.
Yeah, in Massachusetts, it's going to be on the ballot for $15 an hour. You're exactly right.
Yes, and I absolutely anticipate that being passed and then, gradually coming into effect. Now, automation is going to happen regardless, but I can see a lot of places that will do that in response. But large corporations can eat that cost, and small businesses just cannot. And it would be nice to see a way to have, if you're a business with under a certain amount of employees, this is the minimum amount of money you need to pay your employees, versus if you're a business with, this many employees are above, this is what your minimum wage needs to be, because, mom and pop shop on the corner can't support the kind of minimum wage that Walmart or Target can, for example.
You bring up some fair points, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head about what happens in some of these larger corporations who try to pay minimum wage or as close to minimum wage as possible. Thank you for your call.
Thanks, Rich.
And something else to consider is Walmart, with this new tax reform, just said that all their employees around the country are going to be making $11 an hour. But they also closed down some Sam's Clubs, or the rest of the Sam's Clubs, in order to make that happen. So do you think that that's what minimum wage does? You're live on 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Rich.
So what do you think?
Oh, I have a lot to add to it. I'll pick up with what the previous caller was saying about these kiosks.
Sure.
This is the first time I saw one when I went up to Marlboro a couple of months ago and stopped at McDonald's to get a breakfast, okay? When we look at the tax cut, and you do the figures, and it isn't hard, and I know I've mentioned it, the tax cut is at least 78% for corporations, at least. It's going to be very easy now for them to take that money and put that into automation. Do I really believe they're hiring more? No. Do I really believe they're paying more? They may be paying bonuses, maybe, but those are one-shot deals. They're not raises. And in fact, one of the things in the new tax bill is it used to be if you bought equipment for your business, you could write it off over a number of years. I guess you'd call it depreciation.
Right.
Now you can write it off immediately. So that becomes a real attraction for automation. And, we've got to remember Carrier, you got $12 million from the state for automation.
You could also make the statement, though, that makes a real good attraction to create increased working environments for employees.
How?
Because if they're investing into their facility, a lot of people work in a lot of places that are like standard or substandard, but they're not state-of-the-art. This could create a situation where employers invest in places that create state-of-the-art working environments for their employees. So it could go either way.
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
When you invest in automation, you're investing in to take care of the biggest expense businesses have, which is labor. And last Thursday, I think it was when Rick covered for Will, he brought up something interesting. I like Rick. He thinks outside of the box and takes us in areas that are true but we don't think about. When government helps these businesses, I call it corporate welfare, how much are these jobs costing us hardworking taxpayers?
Well, you're talking about economic development and the impacts economic development has on the actual tax dollar and the municipality and the people who live inside of them, and that's a great point that you're bringing up.
Well, I'll give you an example.
Now,
We've heard about in Wisconsin.
But I'm actually trying to kind of stop you there because we do have to go to a commercial break.
Let's finish with this idea,
sure.
if I may, because this is really important.
Sure.
Wisconsin, Foxconn may be coming into Wisconsin. They claim they're going to create 13,000 jobs. I look at what they do, which makes screens for laptops, phones, and all that. These devices are really semiconductor devices, a lot of automation there. But let me take their 13,000 at face value. With a $2 billion giveaway from the government, well, do the math. I encourage anybody to do the math. Take $2 billion and divide it by 13,000, and you get $1,538,800 per employee that they're getting from the taxpayer.
Thank you so much for your call.
Take care.
Have a great day. And if you want to join the conversation on Facebook, you have to go to the Brain Drain with Rich Cabaceras page so you can join the conversation in the comment section. If you're in a group, I can't see those right now. So somebody says on Facebook Live, the argument that if minimum wage is increased, prices of everything will go up because of profit margins will decrease bothers me. Why then does business give raises to workers when profits are good, or merit raises when a worker has good work performance? The cost of goods and services constantly changes for all businesses, so to think if minimum wage stays the same, other costs won't increase is naive. Somebody else says tie the minimum wage with production. Somebody else says $15 an hour? I'd probably quit my skilled job for that. Because there are some people in various parts of the country who are making less than $15 an hour, and they're making far above minimum wage percentage-wise. So that's something to consider as well. Minimum wage tied with cost of living, when we talk about federal living minimum wages, it really can be a sticky wicket. All right, let's stop messing around and let's continue talking about the minimum wage. On Facebook, the famous Jim DuPont, who has the 3 o'clock hour here on 1480 WSAR with Right Thought, says minimum wage was instituted to prevent employers from abusing entry-level workers, most of whom were teenagers and almost exclusively low-skill food service, construction, landscaping, domestic services like house cleaning and babysitting. Great point. Somebody else says somebody will be needed to fix the robots then, which somebody's saying with automation, somebody is going to be needed to fix the robots. We're going to go back to the lines. Caller, you're live on 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Good morning, Rick. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. We hear the calls coming in about corporate welfare, and I don't disagree there is corporate welfare. But the benefits that are passed on to major corporations do not filter down to small businesses. You own a small business, and especially in Massachusetts, you are constantly shelling out of your pocket. Increases in workman's comp and insurance. Okay, now you've got this so-called millionaires tax that if the voters vote on it, will affect anyone who's got a small business as an S-corp.
Well, look at some of the things that have been passed in some of these states, and they're talking about federally paid family medical leave. They're talking about things like minimum wage increases, like mandatory health insurance. Those are all things that hurt the small business guy.
Yes, and I think I think number one, and I could be wrong, someone can correct me. I believe if you have after excess of 5 employees or more, you are going to be obligated to give these benefits. In other words, paid sick leave and insurance. So what will happen, let's say they cut off, let's say the state or the federal government says you have to insure, and if you have more than 6 employees, you're going to have to abide by the law. What they're going to do? They're going to lay off 2 people.
Right.
That's what they're going to do.
Right. And
people
actually,
say that's not right. And I've had people say, well, it's not bad owning it. It's not hard owning a small business.
Look at a rule that was just passed in Massachusetts. They said that if a salary-paid employee works greater than 40 hours under a certain wage, they're going to have to be paid overtime. You know what people did? They put them $1 or $2 above that wage so they didn't have to pay them overtime and have them work 50, 60 hours a week.
I mean, none of this filters down to the small businesses.
Right.
I mean... It's just amazing. It's when you own a small business, you're the last one to get paid if you get paid.
Right.
And people don't see that.
Right. And I was a small business owner for 6 years, and I can tell you it's tough because you're not living weekly.
My wife and I own the business for over 20 years.
Yeah, and you can attest to it.
And we decided this is the time to get out because it's unbelievable.
Can you imagine that? And how you had it for over 20 years, and now is the time to get out.
Well, because between insurances and bureaucracy and nonsense, right down to the town level, okay? And, I hate to say it, sometimes the local people in the locality don't always support a small business.
It's funny because one of the people that, especially when you have these folks who are saying corporations are bad, a lot of times small business owners are lumped into corporations are bad.
That's
sentiment.
right. I mean... I've had people say, hey, you're making so much on blah, 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 blah. I said, I am. I guess I don't pay insurance. I don't pay my employees. I don't have workman's compensation. I don't have insurance.
Yeah,
this is the time, I see it, and I'm glad I'm getting out of the time we're doing. Well, because the headaches we're getting, it was just, I got a note from the state. Workman's comp is going up. Your contribution to workman's comp is going up in 2018. Well, guess what? You're not getting it from me because we're closed.
Well,
take care.
Have a great day.
Bye.
And enjoy your retirement. That being said, I think that it's important that we kind of look at this from all angles. We're talking about the minimum wage, the effects that it has on you, what it happens to the economy because of it. And, there have been people who have been waiting on the line through the news break. We're going to get right to them. Caller, you're live on 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
It's always good to be live.
You got it. It's better to be live than dead.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I haven't got there yet. As far as the minimum wage, I'm looking at the states, and I know there was a caller about border crossing.
Sure.
For a different wage.
And you live in Rhode Island.
Yeah, well, it's about $1,900 difference for the year at 40 hours.
Okay.
It's car insurance. It's But if you go to New Hampshire, the minimum wage is $7.25.
Wow. Yeah. So if you're next to the northern border of Massachusetts, you're seeing that big time. So if you're watching in the Boston area and you want to join the conversation, you can call in 508-673-1480.
You are definitely coming over the border.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm living in New Hampshire, I'm looking for jobs in Massachusetts immediately.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, what jobs are in New Hampshire besides weathermen? No.
That's the most stable job in the entire world is weatherman. Why? Because you can be wrong in New England 100% of the time and still keep your job.
But some states hasn't have an increase. I mean, Alabama, last increase was in 2009, and it's they're $7.25 too. So you could add a couple of bucks on that for workman's comp and all that other good stuff they have to pay the state and federal taxes. You see here. There was another one. Indiana. There's our vice president. Indiana. Where was it? It's like $7.25 too, and they haven't received a raise in years. So.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering if I went over to New Hampshire, would the Big Mac meal be like $5 or something?
I don't know. That's a great question.
No.
But yeah.
No. It doesn't go that way. But you got to add like almost $1.75 to the wage for workman's comp and all that good stuff per hour. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's lots of folks coming into Massachusetts from the bordering state. Even Vermont pays more than New Hampshire.
Can you imagine that? So
yeah.
Well,
and it's almost $10 in Vermont. My battery just went dead in there.
Well, listen, it's okay because we're having some funky stuff happen here right now, too. So thank you for your call. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Have a great day.
Enjoy your weekend, man.
You too. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing, Rich?
Not bad. How are you doing?
Good. Good morning to all the listeners, too.
Yeah, I'm sure they appreciate it, and they're saying good morning to you.
All right, beautiful. Listen, we got a housing crunch. We got people living in Walmart fulfillment centers and Amazon fulfillment centers. We got globalization going on. We have poverty in urban sectors. We have lottery, scratch tickets, liquor, and cigarettes. Poor food choices in urban areas like this. If you have no education, you're screwed in some way. And one of the rappers from Wu-Tang in Brooklyn had since he looked around his old neighborhood and he's seen that there's no healthy food choices, he ended up opening up a juicer shop.
How about that?
I think it's RZA.
Wu-Tang Clan, they're nothing to mess with. You can actually use the real word.
I know that. I know all about the Wu-Tang.
You got it.
But no, listen, we got a problem here. We got corporations running everything. We have globalization on the fringe. You know, just the PowerPoint things I just pointed out. What's your opinion on that? We have poor choices in lower, urban areas. We have a housing crunch. We have, housing priced up, whatever you want to call it. I call it a housing crunch. People call it overpricing.
So to kind of truncate it a little bit, what is my opinion on the effect of minimum wage when we have all these issues in poverty-stricken areas? So I believe that it only has a short-term immediate effect of maybe 6 months, and then after that, cost of living increases again, and everybody's just as poor or poorer than they were the day before.
But it's already set up in that way to, because all right, you go outside your door, you have a bunch of convenience stores. You live in Fall River, you live in New Bedford. This is not a black eye on any city or municipality. This is all urban, poor areas. Okay, you walk out your door, you got convenience store, you have scratch tickets and you have cigarettes. Okay, that takes your money away. That's almost like its own vice, its own addiction.
Well, look at that. The lottery system is a tax on the poor because who plays the lottery? You don't see multi-millionaires and billionaires playing the lottery, and if they do, they buy one ticket. Who is having who's paying the most amount of taxes towards this percentage-wise? It's the poor.
What about
and here's the worst part about this is they say that it's used towards putting more money into education, and that's crap too, because what they really do is they take money that should go towards education and they use it elsewhere, and they use lottery money towards education. So that's a front too. I've heard people say that, state representatives say that here on this radio station, and that's bunk. Any state person in any state who's saying that the lottery increases education, it's crap. Don't listen to it.
It only increases people's well-to-do already pockets. And another thing is that we have to educate ourselves. We have to be responsible for the people, and these representatives need to be held accountable for the people they're supposed to be representing. We live in some tough times. I mean, life is not easy. I get it. But when like I said, I'm going to go over these things again. We have a housing crunch. We have people living in Walmart parking lots, fulfillment centers. We have a globalization. Our president was supposed to be against globalization, but he's going to that summit. Okay.
Well, and I want to stop you there because you're right. And the reason is
you know why I'm saying this, Rich.
Right.
These people got to hear this outside the box. This is fact. You can look this up.
You're 100% correct, but I want to extend the courtesy to other callers who are waiting on the line as well.
Appreciate it, Rich. Thank you.
Have a great day. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Hey, Rich. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
First-time caller. First time listening to your show. I think it's very refreshing for WSAR. So,
thank you so much.
Good job.
I appreciate that.
Hey, no problem. You were talking about trickle-down economics about a half an hour ago, and a lot of people talk about trickle-down economics as an absolute. Like if you give, if you took all the taxes away from corporations, that it should benefit the person at the bottom of the ladder 100%. Like if someone didn't work or someone or was a layabout or whatever, that there's sort of like this absolute connection from the top to the bottom when someone talks about trickle down economics. But I would say it works in a lot of ways. It doesn't work in an absolute way, the way that you hear about it in liberal media. I agree that it doesn't work that way. Let's just look really quick. So we're taking 15% of the taxes away from corporations around the world. I worked for a Fortune 500 company. I've worked for a lot of big companies and small. And, they don't take that money and just put it in their pocket. You know why? Because there's this little thing called competition. And if they basically stop innovating and stop developing and stop competing, then they'll go away because the competition, the further up you go, is more dramatic than it is at even at the lowest level, even compared to a pizza store. And all I'm trying to say is that that competition drives more business, it drives innovation, it drives new ideas, and it drives job creation because with new ideas and new directions comes job creation. So does it do something? Yes, it does. Employ people. It does at different levels. Does it help someone that is not working and is a layabout? Probably not. It does have an effect, but it doesn't have an absolute effect the way that it's described.
Caller, you made a lot of great points. I really appreciate you calling in. I hope you do it again, and thank you for listening to the show. Have a great day.
You bet. Bye now.
Because we are talking about minimum wage and how that affects you, how it affects your lifestyle. Are you making more? Are you making less? So somebody on Facebook Live says, the health field for one, if minimum wage increases, they will not get pay increases in accordance with it because insurance drives what happens with them. Somebody else said, if you have no education, you're screwed. More school, here I come. All you can do is how I see it. That's all you can do in how I see it. And, that's a fair point. There was once a time in this country where you could get a job if you didn't have a high school diploma. And those jobs were fast food restaurants. Those jobs were all the places that you didn't want to work. I can remember going to school and them saying, well, if you drop out of high school, just like they said in Cream by Wu-Tang Clan, if you drop out of high school, what happens to you? you end up working at a fast food place for your entire life. Well, now you need a high school diploma to work at a fast food place. Not to say that that's a bad thing or a good thing, but it's saying it's a thing. So if you are in the situation where now you have to go, and somebody just gave a shout out to the song Cream. It distracted me real quick. But yeah, if you're in the situation where now you have to go to college just to be able to get a middle-class job or even a working poor job, what happens to you, right? If you have a bachelor's degree and you're working in the social work industry, you're making close to minimum wage. If you're working in the if you have a psychology degree, you're making close to minimum wage. You're better off working as a waiter or a waitress, unless you're passionate about what you do. If you're working as a teacher, there are people who graduate with degrees from Harvard and Yale in education and go and become teachers with close to $200,000 in student loan debts. How does that make sense? So, yeah, I think that we really have to look at what we can do with our economy to make it work. And we've talked about a lot of these things in the past, but this is kind of the new part of the conversation of how our economy is working for us. And, yeah, somebody just brought up stick with skilled trades. And that's a fair point. If you have a skilled trade, supply and demand is something that increases your wages and decreases your wages. And odds are, if you're in a skilled trade, your wages are going to go up in proportion with cost of living. Odds. But sometimes that doesn't happen because you know what else is a skilled trade? Healthcare. And if you're a healthcare person and your pay is based on insurance and cost of living goes up because of minimum wage, then guess what happens? You're not getting a pay raise, and everybody else around you is getting a pay raise, so really what we're doing is making our nurses and our doctors and everybody else less wealthy. You're live on 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Good morning. You bring up some interesting points. My opinion is it's worth $15 an hour if you're giving up your skill set to do this kind of work for a couple of years.
And, you know, I think that's something to be said. You're willing to kind of give up a skill set to go and make more money for $15 an hour.
For doing something menial. Like a lot of times people years ago went to Detroit, Michigan, and they'd make $36, $46 an hour doing a simple job. But they did that. They gave up their regular carpentry skills or whatever skills they had, and they just did it for the money and the pension.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're looking at now. The modern day Detroit is in the fast food industry, where you put the sandwich together and you get top dollar for doing it repeatedly over and over again. It's like an assembly job, and you get paid handsomely for it. And then when you, of course, there's no pension at the end of it. But when you're done, you go back to your field of choice. It's almost like taking you're getting a pay raise, but you're giving up your skills for a couple of years.
You know, I think you're bringing up some points that a lot of people can agree with. So, you know, somebody actually said on Facebook Live, and tell me how you feel about this, I think people that make minimum wage and work part-time shouldn't have to pay an income tax. What do you say?
I think that if the market can bear the cost, then why not? I mean, that's why we have $100 million sports athletes, is because the market can bear the cost, not because they're so vital to our system of living. Movie stars also. $25 million a film is not unheard of because the market can bear it. And I think the market can bear $15 an hour in the food industry.
All right.
And I think it's just the beginning of a new way of looking at things, because being in the food services industry is not a glamorous job. And because it's not, you got to the dangle the carrot is the money carrot. And that dangle the money, and they will come, even if it's just for a couple of years. And they'll do their time and say, "Did you work? I worked at McDonald's. I worked at such and such. I worked at such." Oh, you did your time, kind of like being during your military hitch. It's something you did. You got paid well for it, and you put it in your rearview mirror.
You know, it's funny because I think that one of the things that we have to do is just continue having the conversation. And people are afraid to have these conversations on social media and out in public because they're worried about the scrutiny that will come back to them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's very difficult not to be called stupid when someone doesn't agree with you anymore. And that's a tough shot to take. It's one thing to be put down. I mean, I've been told, I don't like your point and you're stupid too. And I said, well, what do you have to put in the stupid part for?
Well, how about
if you
this?
Don't like my point, you don't like my research. You don't like a lot of things about what I did. But don't call me stupid. You're calling a whole bunch of people stupid because I did my research on this.
Well, thank you so much for your points. I appreciate your opinions. Have a great day.
All right, bye-bye now.
And the best part about this show is I think we're breaking that barrier. We're breaking the barrier of people calling people stupid and people trying to hurt people emotionally because they have an opinion. How about we put all of our opinions out there, and then we see which ones work, which ones don't, and we come to a compromise on what works best. That's the way Congress should do it. That's the way Senate should do it. That's the way your state officials should do it. That's the way your city and town officials should do it. So why don't we do that as a society? So somebody on Facebook says, I think people, they already said that one, a lot of companies who pay minimum wage don't hire full-time employees because they don't want to pay health insurance. Low income, someone making $11 an hour, how can they afford health insurance? Maybe companies should have to offer insurance for everyone. Now, what say you? Do you think companies should have to order insurance for everyone? And something else to consider, those people who are working full-time and have insurance, usually they can't afford the insurance, the payments that they have to make per month, their percentage. They also can't afford the co-pays to be able to go to the doctors, to go to the hospital. And then when they call to get welfare assistance, a lot of those people in that bureaucracy tell them to quit their job. So you face these situations where, unfortunately, if you're working poor, you're between a rock and a hard place, and there's this constant pressure pushing you down to either go towards welfare or continue struggling. So can you imagine those folks? And then when you increase the minimum wage, what happens? Those folks get weeded out even more so. Because like people have said before, if you're in the healthcare industry, if you're in the social services industry, and minimum wage goes up, your wage probably isn't going to go up at the same percentage rate. So really all it's doing, minimum wage increases are making people poorer and poorer and poorer. So maybe the answer isn't just a minimum wage increase, but it's economic policy as a whole. And I think that's the question we should be asking our state elected officials. We should be asking our federal elected officials. What are you doing to change economic policy as a whole? Because there are too many people who are working poor. There are too many people who are being pushed to welfare and don't have the opportunity to get off. Because who wants to get off welfare when they're making more money than they would at their minimum wage job? It's difficult. They may want to get off welfare, but they don't have the opportunity to do it. And if they're working poor, the constant pressure to go towards welfare continues to increase over and over, year over year. So somebody asks for Nick's Hot Dogs, what if they know the word but they can't say it by noon? If the word of the day only works if you come to me and you say it between 11 and 12 o'clock. So if you can't be there until afternoon, you're going to have to go check them out anyway. Thank you for that question. But let's talk about some of the economic things that have to change. And insurance is one of these key things that continues to keep people poorer, right? And there's no better indication of that than your Social Security check if you're retired. If you're getting Social Security, they gave you an increase. But the increase in your health insurance went up to a point where you're not really seeing an increase. Or because of the exorbitant costs of healthcare and the increasing costs of healthcare, the cost of the average person's health insurance around this country continues to grow to the point where they're afraid to go to the hospital because they may go broke. Because even if you're making $125,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year, you know what? If you get hurt, if you get into a serious car accident, if something happens to you and you get really sick, you're one step away from being the person who's sitting back and you can't do anything but collect a Social Security check or a welfare check, because we're all not too far removed from being poor. So we're constantly struggling in this rat race to get ahead. Constantly struggling. And if you're somebody who had to grow up in a situation where you're really, really, really poor, then you know what? you're having a harder time struggling in this rat race than somebody who came from a middle-class family. And one of the best ways to point at that is schools, right? If you go to an elementary school in an urban setting and you say, I want to go to a 4-year school that's a private school that the tuition is $40,000 a year, your guidance counselor might tell you you might want to check out a 2-year school, or it might tell you you're not cut out for school, because that was happening, and that still happens. But if you go to a place that's very affluent and you say, hey, I want to go to a 4-year school, you know what happens? They say, we'll do everything we can to get you there. And people will ride it out. Even if they have a C average, a D average, those kids are getting into schools and getting college degrees and devaluing the actual college degree and making it impossible if you don't have a high school diploma to get a job. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Good morning. Talking about money and medical stuff. I'm on Social Security. We got a 2% increase. I got $2 out of that 2% increase, and $20-some went to my medical coverage.
How about that?
Fun, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah.
I can't even buy a loaf of bread on $2.
Right. And the thing, your cost of living went up beyond the cost of your insurance, but what are you going to do with that $2? Exactly. You can't even buy a loaf of bread because
and you can't even get good interest on it in the bank.
Well, here's some perspective for you, and this is something that I experienced firsthand. When I first started working, I was making $6 an hour minimum wage. It went up to $6.75. When I started at $6 an hour, gas prices were 99 cents a gallon. By the time I hit $6.75, gas was up at $2 a gallon.
Good Lord, Maud.
Right. So
well, when I first started working at the phone company, I was bringing home not quite $50 a week paycheck. And the gas prices were everybody chipped in money, and you could go to the gas station and get 50 cents worth of gas. Can't do that anymore.
Wow.
Have a good day.
Thank you so much for your call.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Hi, I'm going to try and drain your brain for a quick second.
You got it.
Hi. I heard on the radio this morning the school superintendent of schools was talking about item number 4, where he feels that the new high school is going to bring economic development.
Okay.
And I want to drain your brain to the point when Durfee High School was built, this current one, did we see any economic development from that? And if we didn't, how are we going to see it from this one?
You know, I
mean, it's just that it's a lame brain excuse. Oh, I don't mean to use the word brain, but
no, it's okay.
I don't see it. And if anyone can remember when this current one was built, I'd like them to call today or tomorrow or the next day and tell me what the development was and how it helped the economy of the area.
I think it's a fair question, and it's something that can be talked about as we continue on with the conversation. But we are getting close to the end of the show, so I appreciate your call, and we're going to extend it off.
I'm being very courteous. Take care.
You got it. Have a great day. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. You got to remember, first thing is the minimum wage is a stepping stone for better jobs. It wasn't meant to be a living wage. It wasn't meant to make careers. Now, back in the old days, in this area, 40-some odd years ago, when you went to work, they had servomation machines. You go in over there, you get yourself sandwiches and stuff like that, whatever you wanted, a cup of coffee, you sat down, you ate. You didn't run off to a fast food restaurant. And prior to that, I know back down in New York, I don't know about around here, you used to have the automats. You walked in, they had all these machines that were similar to the servomation machines, except they were more of a solid wall. And if you wanted a chicken sandwich or a turkey sandwich or whatever you wanted, desserts, coffees, you turned around, you know, you put money into the machines, you took what you want, put it on a tray, you sat down and enjoyed your meal, and you left. You didn't have 16,000 people. And fast food restaurants, the menu is very limited. You know, think about it now. You know, after a while, it gets a little bit sickening, same old, same old. And if you're going to bring a family of 3 or 4 people to a fast food restaurant, it has $15 minimum wages. The cost of going there, after a while, you're going to say, no, I don't think so. It's too expensive. McDonald's is not what it was before, or any of the fast food restaurants. They're very expensive to continue to eat at. I think individuals got to look, especially if you're in high school, look what you want to do for a living. Explore it. If you can get to a school like Diamond, that's the best thing you could ever do.
And Diamond
If
is a
you don't do
vocational
that-
school for those of you who don't know what Diamond is.
Yep, Diamond Regional Technical High School. I came into this area at a younger age, and I graduated in 1968, and I'm very proud to be a Diamond graduate. It made a difference in my life, to say the least. But the thing is, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors. What do they do for a living? Where do they work? Try to network a bit. Try to get an idea what you want to do in life, and if it's additional school courses after high school, whatever you got to do it, and plan on a future career.
Thank you so much for your
Go into the military, get your skill sets at the military. When you come out, you'll be a productive citizen. Okay, I know there's other people on the line.
You got it. And thank you so much for your opinions, and thank you so much for your advice to people who are considering what they want to do when they move forward in life. I want to kind of point out a Facebook comment real quick, and somebody says, corporate welfare reform is desperately needed. And we've talked about that a little bit today, and I'm sure we're going to continue talking about that as time goes on. And if you want to join the conversation, again, the number is 508-673-1480. We've got a few minutes left. And before I get back to the lines, I want to continue talking about something that another caller brought up, which was how building a new school helps economic development. And schools are necessary to help spur economic development. It's not the sole piece, but it's one of the major pieces. And one of the issues that we've experienced here, at least where I'm from, is when a school was built in the 1970s, they were using money and taking money from education to fund things like new buildings and funding things like public safety and funding things like economic development and taking that funding from education. And then in our state, Massachusetts, they created this net school spending law, which required everybody to spend a minimum amount towards schools to protect students' educations. So what we did in the 1970s was build a new high school, and we actually decreased funding for education for other entities. And what that caused is more and more children graduating who didn't have the skills to succeed. And there's no better place to look at that than kind of the output of students from who graduated in the 90s and the early 2000s and the 1980s who were under this pre-net school spending situation. So once net school spending got wrapped into the entire thing, it allowed for the student to succeed. It allowed for the student to have an opportunity that people in other municipalities who are wealthier, they gave them the same opportunities. We're going to go back to the lines. Caller, you're live on 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Good morning.
How you doing?
Good,
Can you turn your radio down in the back, please?
Okay. As far as the high school goes,
I can still hear myself.
You
have to
economics
sir, you have to turn your radio down in the background. I can hear myself speaking. All right, there we go.
It's not just about what the economics of the high school will bring economic-wise. It's about the companies that might come in the future, but it's also more important about the education of our kids.
All right. Thank you so much for your call. We're going to go to the next caller. I think you bring up a very fair point. You're live on 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Hi. I'm not against a new school, but I'm for a new school with provisions that what happens inside the school changes. Will that school be run more like Diamond, where if there's graffiti painted on, or there's violence, or there's other things, that those children are expelled, or at least separated from the school? Will there be a change where they don't have a year where they don't have any certified math teachers in the classrooms? I think the personnel and what goes on in the school is extremely important. Just because you have a new facility doesn't mean that the education is going to be any better.
I
and
think
that's my concern, is really concentrating once that school's built on, making sure that school stays new. There's no vandalism. There's respect for it. The kids are disciplined, and I don't know what you can do about that.
I think you make a very fair point, because just because we built a new school doesn't mean the problems go away, but it gives us an advantage and a better opportunity to fix those problems. We need to make sure that we're investing in our children as opposed to divesting from our children. So I think you bring up a very fair point. It's a very astute point. And that's something that could help kind of America as a society. If we invest in education, we will have smarter people who create new things, who are able to contribute more so to society, and that creates a better country.